share this slide deck that we put together just to get things going. Where is it? Find the damn thing now. All right.
Therese is trying to get in, Anton.
Therese is trying to get in. Okay, I'll get her in. In fact, Alpa, could you do that, please?
Yeah.
You have the. So, hello everybody. Welcome to Monday Live. This is our third edition, so things are still a little bit rough, but we're getting things organized and getting better, I think. So before we get going, why we're doing this, we're doing this because we really want to have a conversation about how we're getting through this pandemic together in the BAS space, and also to try and figure out what's on the other side. All right, so that's kind of the what this show is all about. Couple of points to just to make. First is that we don't really have answers. I don't think anybody has answers to a lot of the questions, and I'm not sure anybody has a lot of the questions. So this is really just a conversation to try and figure out all of these things and help us get it through and try and figure out what's on the other side. All of the panelists' profiles are on mondaylive.org. So if you want to know who's who, it's everybody's listed there. Point to make that the views expressed in this show is personal views of the panelist, not of any organization or company. And please use the chat and the Q&A tools that's on Zoom so that we can actually respond to you and have this conversation. And the last point to make is that when you finish this webinar, as Zoom calls it, there is a survey. Please respond to that. We would appreciate that. Our website is mondaylive.org, and if you were to tweet stuff, hashtag is mondaylive, hashtag mondaylive. So we're going to try something a little bit different today. We're going to have sort of the introductions, but each of the panelists have sort of prepared some links and some sort of headlines that have caught their attention over the past few days. And we're going to open this up to the panelists to actually talk through those. And then once we get through these pretty quickly, then we can continue have our normal dialogue. So the first one that we have up is John. So John Petze.
Yeah, hi. You know, the goal for me was just to share the types of things I'm seeing and reading. I think one of the big takeaways is there's too much conflicting information still. While some articles are talking about coming back into buildings, others are saying they're not going back. This one was very recent. Google employees told to expect to work from home for the rest of the year. And they've stopped the project in Toronto, and they're not going ahead with a major purchase. I also thought it was interesting that there's a negative impact on clean energy jobs. You know, and I think all of this is what the group is trying to sort out, and all of our listeners are. There's just so much divergent and conflicting information out here. So those are some. I don't know, you got a few others. Yeah. And then the whole legal thing, retaliation, you're going to be able to sue. And then I thought the interesting thing was people would say, hey, watch out, alcohol-based sanitizers in certain places can actually be a flammability hazard. You know, it's logical, it's flammable, but I certainly hadn't thought about that. I don't have any open flames in my office anyways. So just some of the, you know, and then some of the positive things, you know, GM's going to reopen. You know, but then negative seed funding on the startups. And just before today, I don't have the headline, you know, people were touting that, you know, it's really going to be the new companies, the entrepreneurs who are going to come out of this crisis with new business models, new solutions that are going to drive things forward. Okay, that makes good sense, except seed funding is down, right? So all I can say is lots of conflicting messages that I see out there.
Great, thank you. And there are the links
Yeah.
for those articles. And we'll post this slide deck at the conclusion of the show. And Ken, you have a couple of things to highlight?
One thing I wanted to mention is we've been requested by CABA. Mark and I are going to give a presentation on Wednesday, and the impact of COVID on intelligent buildings. They run their intelligence building meetings all the time, and they're just trying to get their mind around. So as you can see, what we're trying to do here is trying to grasp industry opinion quickly, and Monday Live is the way we're doing that. Next slide. Okay, the other thing is I've submitted my next chapter to Connected Contractor. It was accepted this morning, and it's also going to be our the theme for our June issue. And the way I'm taking this is that what we're faced with is research, reinvention, recreate, reboot, and then we just repeat the process if necessary, and we keep doing that till we get it right. I think it's going to come up. It's going to be different in different places. Our global reboot is a big advantage because we're seeing this happening all over the world, and we can kind of watch folks see how they make out. Some of them are making pretty bold moves. Some of them are pretty cautious. We can see which ones work, and we can probably follow it. The other thing that I think is there's not going to be any silver bullet. There's not going to be one solution. It's going to be many solutions, and we're going to have to adapt to our local environment and local restrictions and codes and requirements. So anyway, that's I've linked together a bunch of resources in that issue, and I'm looking forward to anybody contributing to our June issue.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Jim?
Hello, everyone. I'm particularly interested in how HVAC systems can either contribute to the spread of the disease or perhaps help reduce the spread of the disease within buildings. And ASHRAE is my go-to resource for this. They are posting a number of things, including one that Jim Lee mentioned last week on infectious aerosols that has some specific recommendations for building owners and building designers. They also have a good frequently asked questions section that could help people who are thinking about reopening buildings. So link is, you get to the link by clicking on the image. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Therese, are you in?
Yes, hello, I'm in. I am reiterating one of the things that John Petze mentioned, which is Google seems to really be pulling back a little bit, both locally to me in the San Francisco Bay Area. It has led the retreat, as the headline I captured, on real estate deals. It's recognizing that it's not going to need as much space as it thought it did before. And then tangentially related would be this pullback from the smart city effort that they had going on in Toronto under Alphabet's company Sidewalk Labs. That it's interesting it's interesting to watch the big tech companies who are really actually coming out of this experience flush. I mean, if you look at the very big Google with its Google Cloud, it wins because so many things are going infrastructure as a service, software as a service. Cloud is winning, I think, advertising wise, as people shop more online. Google's advertising is winning. Certainly, Amazon is going to come out of this stronger than it went in. Facebook as well, almost in a frightening way. These companies are going to come out so strong, but one thing they seem to be pulling back on is real estate. And then, oh yeah, this next slide, this was really great. I hope everybody reads it. New article in Consulting Specifying Engineer magazine, interview with Rory Barnwell of DLR Group. I caught one quote, but there's so many quotes in there. In this big engineering firm that is DLR Group, Rory leads the building optimization practice. So he's been really a pioneer in terms of specifying engineers using high-end analytics tools. And he is seeing in his building optimization practice lots of demand right now for remote access. And right behind that, I'll reiterate Jim Butler HVAC systems that he sees up ahead, major upgrades to HVAC systems being a priority. That's it.
Thanks, Therese. Mark?
So it seems like there's a common thing between John and Therese and myself about Sidewalk Lab, so we won't talk about that, but I will throw in a bonus for you at the end. You're not going back to normal office life for a long, long time. This was actually from the UK via the New York Times, which I thought was a very, very interesting. Again, all about the idea of social distancing and what truly will the office look like when we all go back. Another one is the increase in discussion around Legionnaire's disease. Many of our buildings have been closed or reduced in their operations, as we all know, and there is opportunity for Legionnaire's disease to grow or incubate. And I think this is something that we in this industry will need to address. And another one that I don't have on here, as I said, I'll give you a bonus, was one I found a few minutes ago is from ISO, how to use ISO standards to address the pandemic. And what was nice about this, they go into addressing the continuity of operations, addressing security and the communications of data, addressing quality of the products and services, and so forth and so on. And Anto, I'll send you that link so that you could put it on the post show. But interesting headlines for sure.
Thank you, Mark. Who we have? Mr. Scholten.
Hey, yeah, just a quick article out of buildings.com. If you haven't seen this, there's a nice article by Sarah there. She points out sort of 3 tips on managing empty buildings. I thought the first 2 are pretty obvious and straightforward. The third one I thought was very interesting and compelling. There is I think what she's saying is because of the downtime and everything else, this is really a great time to spend doing new and different initiatives that you probably didn't have time and opportunity to do in the past. So whether you're a building owner, building operator, or a system integrator helping building owners, I think this is again, she's pointing out, this is a good time to kind of really experiment and do new things. And back to Anto's and John's point about new opportunities going to come out of this, I think this is the time to really have an opportunity to learn. And I'm also starting a contest. You got to name the city skyline behind me.
Thanks, Anna. Scott.
Hey guys, hey everybody. Thanks for joining us today. You know, one of the things that I've seen a lot about is smart buildings, healthy buildings, intelligent buildings. This part that, you know, I know Anno doesn't like so much, but the new normal. And really all of that's going to be driven by how safe do the occupants of your building feel? What information are you communicating to them? And how are you going to communicate that information to them? They're going to want to know that they're entering into a safe building. Next. This came up over the weekend. I thought it was interesting. You know, kind of the reverse, instead of safe distancing and social distancing, Elon Musk, who's certainly a business leader in the US, if not throughout the world, has filed a lawsuit against Alameda County because he's not able to open up his factory, and he's threatening to move all of his operations to Texas. So I just thought that was interesting. That's it for me, Anto.
That's it. Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. Others who have not spoken, maybe want to introduce themselves?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I can throw in one. I saw an interview with the CEO of Breather, which is a space management company. I think it's what is significant is that companies, he talked about companies rethinking signing or renewing leases. And because a little bit what Scott brought up about, you know, people wanting to return to healthy type offices, and probably on top of that, want to, you know, flexible space options as well as, you know, reduced space and maybe headquarter footprint, is probably going to be a major shift in the way people use buildings and how much they'll give up of you know, buildings to just have flexible space in future rather than dedicated buildings everywhere. And I just thought it was an interesting point to raise, because I do think that you know, people will reconsider you know, renewing or signing their lease if the building's not suitable for how they want to carry on business in the future.
Cool. Jim Lee?
I think that I've been reading more articles along the lines that John Petze put up, and we're seeing that especially the commercial office sector. I've talked to some financial people on Wall Street. Apparently the REITs and others are beginning to panic at this point about what happens. And remembering that it's actually just a small amount of marginal decrease in demand for that space is enough to tip the business over. So it doesn't need to be a 30% drastic cut. You know, a 10% downturn will completely destabilize the economics of commercial real estate. So I think I'm watching that carefully to see what happens.
Tracy, did you?
Hi, thanks, Anto. This week I've been reading and following a little bit more about getting the workforce back working. A lot of our customers are small or medium-sized businesses. You know, there's been a lot written about the PPP program that went out, which, you know, we pursued and participated in. And it's been interesting to watch where there's a combination of, you know, now there's some clarity coming in terms of all of that program and additional rules that are being published in the form of FAQs as opposed to formal clarification documents. They're putting it into an ongoing series of FAQs, which I find kind of interesting. But general optimism, I think, in getting the workforces back in the market space. But at the same time, you know, I'm also tracking some of the economic data that's going on, and kind of consistent with what everybody else is saying here. You know, how long is this going to last? Are we headed, you know, not just for a recession, but maybe even a depression? And what the definition of a depression really is. Turns out there's not a lot of common clarity on what really a depression is. But there's a lot of unanswered questions in terms of workforce and some of the government support programs. And I know that the numbers were staggering in terms of dollars that they put out there to try to aid. What I've been finding, though, and trying to help others get into these programs, is that it's fallen far short of the mark to really do long-term good. More importantly, in our industry, I think what we're going to find is we're not suffering today like the airlines or tourism, but 6 months from now or 12 months from now is when we are going to need help in our industry. And now I'm quite sure and convinced, after doing all the reading I've done this week, that there won't be aid at that time.
Alpa, you have some thoughts? What's been occupying you? You're on mute.
Yeah. I read a couple articles about Austin or cities like small but young and techy cities will bounce back faster than others. That's one of the articles I read. And other than that, I don't think we don't even know what this virus is. So it's going to be dependent upon that. That's pretty much it. And I've been working on the technology. I didn't do much reading overall.
Okay. Steve.
So I saw an article similar to the one Mark talked about on the from New York Times, but this is out of the UK, about the risk around Legionnaire's disease. If I recently became aware of a company called Aquanomics out of North Carolina that specializes in a package solution for detecting Legionnaires and corrosion in systems. So if you've got a customer who's concerned about that, you might want to take a look at that. It's not a formal endorsement, I just know of them. Okay. But, you know, it was interesting. I was at a doctor's office today, and they that had a poster on the wall, believe it or not, about residential air quality. And it was from a company called APCO, APCO, that makes UV duct work for inline air purifier using ultraviolet technology. And it occurred to me that with so many people working from home, a winner in this thing is going to be residential HVAC if they wake up to it, because you're at home, your homes are essentially not all that well controlled from an air quality standpoint. And if these homes are going to need to be retrofitted to improve the quality of the air. And so the companies like APCO perhaps may be somebody who's going to emerge as a winner in all this thing, because they have technology that can be retrofitted into furnaces and into air handling systems. And people are working from home. And what's the quality of the air? Well, generally in homes is pretty bad. So there's a real opportunity. It's, you know, the downside, you know, we talked already about the commercial buildings needing to do something as well. But when you have people like Google coming out and saying, we're not sending anybody even into a building for the rest of the year, that means people are working from their homes. And the quality of the environment in the homes is not where it needs to be. So
Steve, it's interesting. It's Mark. Interesting you say that, because on the television here in the Richmond, Virginia metro area, where Steve and I and John live, the AC, the air conditioning and heating folks are advertising just that fact on TV now, that they will come in and make your home COVID safe or whatever it is. So it's interesting you bring that up, and how it's now transferring to the people in the field to go ahead and come into the homes and do what you're saying.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
Nathan?
Yeah. I was just going to add one more point. Oops. Sorry, Leighton, go ahead.
Oh, not a problem. This is a cultural phenomenon, and in trying to make sense of what's happening and where it's going, I've tried to parse this into three different areas. Basically, regulatory policies. These are the factors to open and close businesses. These are the policies in place. Who makes the determination? Are these legal representatives, medical representatives? Are these state or federal jurisdictions? So all of the reasons and rationale for opening or closing are in that area. The next would be the environmental factors. Are my buildings safe? What will it take to make them safe? How will I keep them safe? And from a personal view, is a building safe to go into? I don't know the answers to that or what the factors will be to determine that. And third are the social dynamics. Are people going to feel comfortable working or mingling with other people in a social environment? People are not going to return to Las Vegas unless they're comfortable in a crowd. And that, of course, dictates how Las Vegas will recover from all of this. So I'm looking at those three areas. Again, there's the regulatory policies, the environmental factors, and then the social dynamics at hand, all intertwined and interplay with each other.
Okay. And last, Bill, go around the table here.
Thank you. What I'm keeping an eye on right now, and Tracy, just to answer your question, I read something that a recession is when your neighbor's laid off. Depression is when you're laid off. And so kind of the point is, it doesn't really matter. It's going to get ugly. I'm paying attention to this particular industry, as decentralized and fragmented as it is, which could be good and bad. And my view is that it could be very good. The fragmented nature of this particular industry could allow, I'd be interested to see how quickly you folks can pivot and adjust and create. So that'll be an interesting thing to sit back and watch. Hopefully I'll be able to participate in that at some level. And then of course, not to put too fine a point or make things too dramatic, But I'm also thinking about the human aspect of this and that Depression era discussions and you know, the quicker we could get people back into all these buildings, the quicker people maybe less fortunate than the folks on this call are going to get back to work and get more secure financially. So that's what I'm paying attention to.
Cool.
You know, and Anto, before we move on, I was just going to respond a little bit to what Steve said, and it felt like threading through this is that home technology. It was actually Phil Zito that mentioned it on our first call, is that things coming out of the smart home might become a lot stronger. I know Alper's been involved in Thread, but Google was really pushing Thread for Google Home, Apple with its Apple Home, Amazon. We know it's moving fast with Alexa to try to take over more home things. I think in terms of standards, we got to watch what's much more closely now what's coming out of the home. And when you look at these bigger steps by Google, very comfortably cutting back on real estate and telling everybody to stay home for much longer, it's because there's nothing but win in there for Google. And I would I'd be watching what's happening at the home level in terms of standards for our industry much more closely.
Okay, so this week's topic is how we're going to get back, you know, the process of getting back. I think that's very much on all of our minds and all of the minds of everybody. And this is kind of a good summary of what attitudes are out there. And I've heard, you know, opportunities, I've heard panic, I've heard, you know, moving to the home. Maybe we can discuss a little bit about the sort of the attitude or the pace or how this is going to happen over the next, I don't know how many weeks, few months of us getting buildings back open. Is it going to be driven by the panic and, you know, REITs basically losing their shirts, or is it going to be driven by opportunities? Just trying to get some kind of discussion around that. Any thoughts?
I think it's going to be a giant experiment, Anto. We're all going to try different things. Everybody's going to try a different thing in a different city. We're all going to learn from it. We'll try something will go bad, we'll go backwards, and we'll take one step back, and then we'll take 2 steps forward. I just see this as being a giant experiment, which is kind of back to my article, the article on the building.com. This is the time to experiment with that stuff, right? Let's see what works. And you don't need to make big steps, just make small incremental steps, try something. We don't have to go all rushing back, you know, like Google, don't have to all go rushing back to the offices. You know, what are small steps, small wins that we could do? And we need to publicize those wins, right? What worked, and then try another one, and then what worked and try another one, you know. This isn't going to happen overnight, and this is going to happen through creativity and new ideas and new thoughts and new ways. Just like after 9/11, right? We tried all sorts of things after 9/11, and now they're just part of the live stream process.
I think a little bit on the same as Anno there, in that I think, you know, people are going to be slowly going back. We've already got in Europe here a little bit pushback from the union saying, hey, if the office is not, you know, the right conditions, can I walk out and things like that. But I also think that there's probably going to be a lot more kind of shift patterns where people will come in early or go late and just kind of ease back into it rather than one big hit of everybody attending the office suddenly. And of course, just like Google and everybody else is saying, is a significant amount of people are going to be told, hey, just carry on working from home. It's working okay for us, so that's not a problem.
You know, I had an interesting conversation with my daughter-in-law yesterday. She works at GoDaddy, so another tech company who is because apparently when you have time on your hands and you're working from home and you don't have a job, you go get a new website and URL from GoDaddy. They're swamped right now with business. But the perspective was they announced this past week that they didn't think that they would be going back into the offices until maybe later next fall. They moved their entire worldwide call centers all over. and their entire employees out in under 5 days. And when talking to her a little bit about the decision, one of the things that came up I thought was kind of interesting, which is they're finding ways to successfully operate their company remotely. In order to open their buildings back up and bring people back in, they have to make a significant investment in adjusting the environment in which they're working. Everything from the stuff that we do on the HVAC side to partitions to remapping the flooring. You know, they're in call centers for the most part, so they're crammed in quite closely. And they saw this as a way to avoid having to make that investment in the short term. So they chose to keep the buildings closed and let the business operate as is, with everyone working remotely to avoid that investment.
I think it's Mark. I think it's gotta start with a multi-tiered strategy that takes into account what Roger and Tracy and Anno just said, as far as you're gonna start a little bit and it's gonna expand, it's gonna go further, further, and further. And I don't think you can roll the dice on just one strategic plan. You've gotta be able to have multiple, depending on the situation. And then as I say it, you know, we've heard Google, you know, and I know a major financial institution here, they were supposed to say that they're going to open up their offices again in July. That's now changed. They told all the employees they'll let them know in September what the plan will be. And if you want to talk about the tech companies adding to keeping everybody away until after the first of the year, Facebook announced the same thing. So again, my take on this is you need multiple strategies to be able to address this whole thing and be prepared to execute on whichever one is the ultimate for the individual.
Yeah, and I was just going to say the difference between super cool Google and Facebook. Yeah, stay away for a year. We don't care. And their former friend, Elon Musk, if he was running PayPal right now, he'd probably be super cool too. But the fact is he's running a car company right now, and that's not so cool. People can't stay home. And he's competing with, because we've mentioned car companies a couple times, and the idea of flexible manufacturing, that portion of our customer base that is making real stuff, needs to get people back to work. And I think Leighton brought up an interesting curve in our last conversation about what those steps are. And I think if we really want to observe those steps, we don't go to Manhattan and see what they're doing in the sky rises. We go to Ford and GM and other manufacturing places to see how they're trying to return in an organized, according to what we're now calling the Leighton curve, you know, like how can we space workers? How do we shift when they come in? It's going to happen to the manufacturing industry, that part of our customer base first. And the high tech companies that were taking all the city center spaces and Silicon Alleys and Silicon Austins, they've got options. They don't have to come back to work.
I've got a question for the group, which is around testing. So the thing I've been trying to pay attention to is notices about availability of inexpensive, easily administered COVID-19 testing, and what companies are out there that are trying to either have some sort of a nursing function right in the building, or has a clinic down the road where employees can quickly test themselves. If they have any symptoms, they can just go in and get tested, and then have the confidence that they're going into a building that's safe. But I'm not seeing much with regard to some of these new test capabilities that are supposed to be coming out for either saliva or the finger prick test that are quick and inexpensive. And are you seeing anything where companies are talking about?
Yeah, watch Amazon.
Amazon is the only one I've heard. That was a couple weeks ago.
Because they've got a win in there. They want to bring the vaccine out. They've got the supply chain to deliver it. They've got they've got all these.
Yeah, but the point being that if I'm Ford and I want my employees to come into the factory, I want to be able to give them the option to get
A new
past-
nation, the new nation of Amazon.
Last night on
gonna-
60 Minutes, they did a piece on Amazon distribution, and that's exactly, they had the employees walking in, thermal scanning as they walked in, not only check that they are authorized to come into the place, check the temperature, they go through, then they stop at a nurse's station where they're given a test, and I don't know if it was saliva or whatever, that they take it there, it's given back to the nurse, and then they are informed whether or not they are negative or positive.
Oh, okay, so they are doing it.
Yeah,
Okay.
which was, it was, you know, it was
I think
really
that
cool to
needs be
see
very
that.
widespread. That could
Yeah,
make a
but again, that's something unique at this particular point in time. Can it be scalable? Who knows?
And what I would ask, you know, look at the employment base in the U.S. It's majority small, medium-sized businesses. What are they going to do? They can't implement those kinds of practices and have a nurse's office in their business. So we've got,
they're going to go to Amazon for it. Like, that's what Amazon wants. It wants another reason it doesn't have to pay taxes. It wants another new business, and the business thereafter right now is healthcare. And they're going to be offering their services among all the other things that they do. They have Whole Foods in every major, you know, like how many Whole Foods are that? They'll turn that into little clinics. They've got so many of the pieces already. It's scary.
So
University of Arizona seems to have an aggressive plan for bringing students back in the fall. And part of that is having their own in-house testing capability.
Yeah.
Cool. I think that one of the
already
things
working on a solution prior to this happening, but they're able to
have the ability to share this information. And I've been, as much as possible, been on LinkedIn. Just anytime I find information that I find useful, I've just been plugging it, whether it has that much to do with automated buildings or not. But I think the research part of it and the value of Monday Live is just sharing all these concepts so we can follow them out. So I applaud that, and anything we can do to document that is great.
I think getting back is going to be like a PID loop.
Or is the control
Make the PID loop the best. It's a second wave, it will change.
Quarter wave decay.
It's definitely going to take to make all this happen. There's, you know, later this year or early next year, there'll be a step function change, you know, when vaccines become available, right? It's going to be another whole twist to this thing.
I want to pose a question to Jim around the Wall Street findings. Is there a tipping point where things start to crumble and they become irretrievable in terms of the economy, buildings, tenants, et cetera?
The discussions I've had with people involve not just the commercial real estate vertical, but also retail and certainly travel. And the question is, of course, is how long do things stay down? And if they don't stay down too long, there's a better chance of it bouncing back. But a lot of the things that we're discussing in this forum are structural changes that people are talking about. And I feel them very personally because I'm considering doing some of these things myself with my own business. And but the key is that in any of these businesses, just like our own business, it's everything on the margins is very important because capitalism is extremely efficient and it doesn't take very much to destabilize things. From the point of commercial real estate, if tenants, and you know, we've looked at these big trends with some large insurance companies and the tech sector saying that they're going to be, you know, downsizing their white collar office fleets. That basically, yes, it hurts rents, but that also hurts the value of property. And then it hurts the financial system, the banks and the financing groups that have put these things together. And that feedback loop is quite tight and could lead to a downward spiral pretty quickly. question is that, you know, if you believe that it's all going to be over in 18 months, then there's room for optimism on the other side. But I think it's almost a certainty right now that there's going to be a downslide in the value of commercial real estate. Not just the rents, but the properties themselves.
So I brought in
net operating income, right? Net operating income.
Right.
And that's how investors do the calculation. This is all your building's worth.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I brought in Rick Grolson. Ken and I have been having an email conversation. Rick, maybe you can briefly introduce yourself and maybe chime in on what you've been hearing here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anto. Rick Ralston. I'm the CEO of Built Space in Vancouver. And yeah, we are looking at really the health and safety aspects of what's happening. And I think it's really going to change the building automation, smart buildings industry, and that we now have to look at people and buildings at the same time and in an integrated solution. And the comments about how it will change the asset value, I think, are interesting, because I was listening to an asset manager earlier last week, and they are seeing that 20 to 40% of retail are paying rent. Surprisingly, 90+% of office paid their rent for April, and multifamily residential, they were seeing 85%, and warehouses, of course, were actually doing very well as well. So, you know, it's by asset class that I think we'll see a lot of differences. But I think the other thing that has really come up to me is the idea that really now our industry has a different audience, and it's been elevated from, you know, we're talking to facilities managers and building operators. It's now we are talking to asset managers, CIOs, the boardroom, and I think that there's going to be some big change. And the other thing that I wanted to point out was I was in Australia in January. COVID started a little earlier there. They've had an 89% recovery now, and they have literally fewer than 100 people in hospital. In Canada, we're at about 47% recovery. In the US, things started later, and the recovery rate that was last reported was about 19%. But you know, given the time frame, you know, I think that hopefully Canada and the US can see similar and time frame. But economically, that's, you know, another question.
Comments from anyone on that?
Yeah, I think just Rick, out of interest in that summary of the different buildings. So you said it's going to apply differently to the different asset types. Do you think there's going to be a move in interest in asset types? Are we going to move away from this stuff to more spread out stuff?
Well, certainly the asset managers are going to look at different types of assets, and you know, the value of certain assets will be discounted quite heavily. And you know, I would not want to be in the mall business right now.
One thing you said is that our audience going forward is different, and it's likely to get the ear of the CFOs and other sort of people higher up, as it were, more the decision makers. That's not a bad thing at all. I mean, that's in many ways that we've been trying to, this industry has been trying to talk to those people.
Well, I think that's where you're going to get a lot of the decisions and the push that's going to drive all this is from that C-suite. And if they're not taking the initiative, then their board of directors will be asking, why aren't you doing that? So,
well, and it's health and safety, number one, and you know, that goes right to the C-suite.
Do you think that's because there's a shift from actually the building they're into, it's affecting their staff, which is probably their priority?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so if it is safer for corporations and employers to keep people at home, then that's what they're going to do.
Risk mitigation.
Yeah.
The funny thing is that under OSHA regulations, if you direct someone to work from home, then they are under the same remote worker, lone worker type occupational health and safety regulations that they would be as if you were, you know, a service contractor or someone doing work. And so there are some pretty serious implications to working from home. You know, it doesn't give them the carte blanche ability just to say, you know, go do your work and don't bother us. But that just doesn't work.
You bring up a good point. How about workman's comp? Let's say I'm in my upstairs office and I'm working. I walk downstairs to get a cup of coffee and I fall down the stairs. Am I covered by workman's comp?
Good question.
Everybody else except you, Mark.
Thanks, Steve.
You want to officially on your coffee break time. Was it 10:15?
Yeah, you know, again, there's a lot of, you know, Leighton brought it up earlier and we've talked about it in previous conversations. The compliance and legal new things that are before us that there's no question in my mind that I think we're going to have to adhere to going forward in some way, shape, or form. What that is, I don't know yet. So,
yeah, the challenge I have with the compliance statements, Mark, is, you know, compliance to what? You know, there's lots of different initiatives going on and stuff like that. So
right. It's still the unknown. We don't know.
Target.
We don't know yet. Yeah.
So is another way of stating the responsibility of people working at home is that the home then becomes part of the commercial fleet, kind of, and certainly from an employer's perspective.
The employer is responsible for that worker if they've directed them to work in that remote site, which happens to be your home, and all of the same ergonomics, all of the same compliance and health and safety and supervision stays in place. So under, you know, most OSHA and other remote worker, lone worker regulation is, you know, you have to be in verbal or visual contact with every remote worker at the end of the day. So do you meet that? That's a good question.
I think one of the things that's fascinating is how quickly, and I think most companies are kind of shocked how quickly it was to easy transition to people working at home and suddenly finding that they could carry on business. And it's kind of fueled the whole thinking. If they'd have had lots of technical issues, lots of other issues, it might have slowed everything down. But people have suddenly found, hey, this is easy to do, actually. It's not a real problem. It's kind of helping people think more about it. And I'm really, you know, surprised how most companies have started thinking about this purely because, you know, it was an easy transition from moving people out of the office to working from home.
I think that talks back to what we mentioned earlier too. I think what Rick's talking about, Roger, too, about the type of lease and the type of property that I need as a result, right? I wonder if I can do remote, but maybe I only need a conference room every so often, you know, to get together, which changes my need and changes the type of lease that I'm looking for and how I operate that.
Yeah, leases will just get shorter, right? Nobody's going to sign a long lease.
Well, that goes back to Jim's point, though, in the conversation he had with some members of Wall Street. It doesn't take much to tip this thing. Going back to 2008, when we had the residential mortgage crisis, most people didn't understand what was meant by mortgage tranching. And after the 08 crisis, now everyone knows what mortgage tranching is. So what is going to be that tipping point? And are the REITs going to create some sort of incentive to get people back into their buildings? It'll be interesting.
But do you think those incentives would be financial, operational, structural?
Could be all of the above, Anno. I mean, they're going to have to do something to get people back in their buildings and get, occupants and leaseholders to pay their rent and want to have an incentive to keep that office space. Because we're all talking about, Jim's talking about, well, I'm looking at it from a business perspective of, I may not renew my lease. And if many other small businesses do that, what does that impact on the commercial real estate sector?
So that's an interesting point, right? So, bringing it back to our perspective and the sort of stuff that most of this group here has is, how do we help the REITs and the building owners with that problem, right? How do you help them? Now, we can't help them with the financial side. That's part of their stick, but we could help them with structural, operational. There's stuff that we can do to help them out to entice the building owners, the tenants back, but that needs discussion and meetings and conferences.
Correct.
I'm not sure that the building owners are going to have a whole lot to do with what brings the people back into the buildings. I think it's going to be driven much more by political, social, regulatory kinds of things as they unfold here. It's interesting, I made a trip to the grocery store over the weekend, and you could almost feel the tension in the air between the people wearing masks and the people not wearing masks.
Yeah.
And when you expand that out into what's going on, do we come back to the office or not come back to the office? I think, the things that drive that division in the country right now are going to have a whole lot more to do with it than anything that building owners could do to try to help get people back in.
Actually, Rick, you caught my interest. One of the things that you were doing that caught my interest is you were quoting Joseph Allen and some of the healthy building stuff he had been proposing. And my kind of feeling on that is that probably our houses are a little weak on supporting that. Can you maybe just comment on some of that? You were basically just basically supporting some of that thinking.
On the healthy buildings.
Healthy buildings,
yeah. Yeah, I think that the landlords do have, the asset owners do have a new level of table stakes that they're going to have to live up to, and it's going to raise the bar. The idea that a landlord that does not put forward a healthy environment with proactive management of HVAC and ventilation and cleaning and all of those things is going to end up very quickly lagging and losing tenants. And it's the stakes have been raised. Personally, we are planning to go back to the office next week and hoping that our own team will come to the office as well. And I think there's a good chance that they will. But we will be looking for more from our landlords in terms of what are you doing for cleaning? It's not enough to put a placard in the lobby saying that our cleaning schedule is normal. We need to see more, and I think that's an opportunity for the industry right now, is to help those end customers, those are proactive. It's not good enough anymore to
Coming back to what I was saying, that's a little bit of regulatory, I think, is going to come into that piece of it, right? What are the regulations on that?
We just physically have to prove to the people that the buildings are healthier than their own. That's going to be a tough job, but we have the documentation. We can present that information.
The city of Vancouver, for example, is putting forward 6 monthly testing of Legionella in cooling towers and water features and so forth. They were planning to do that this year, and that is a regulation that is coming in, and I think we'll see more of that, as are some of the technical safety regulators that we work with that are saying, hey, we need to better understand maintenance of this type of or boilers or ammonia plants or whatever it happens to be, and I think we will see more regulation happening. So yeah.
Jim Lee, in your analysis of the real estate, did you take a look at the profile of who are in office buildings? The reason I raised that as a question is my last company, I was involved with a lot of law firms, and law firms generally are located in office buildings. And when I think about how lawyers actually operate law firms, they're really a bunch of individual businesses all collectively under some umbrella name of a law firm, but each lawyer pretty much runs independently. And if those lawyers are all figuring out that they can work from home, putting 20 or 30 or 50 lawyers in a commercial space begins to make far less sense than it does today. Because you want to have a client meeting, sure, you can meet for that. But day to day, you're not having client meetings, you're just cranking out documents. So I'm just curious as to, is there any good statistics on what the commercial office building space is being occupied by? What kind of businesses? Any comments on that?
I think it's very broad and mixed, but I think that it's not just that people have had these fancy offices for the efficiency of work. It was for theater, right? Of basically illustrating how fancy and how highbrow their firm was. And I think that's true for a lot of Class A real estate in downtown areas. In my own business, I have very limited exposure. I can count on one hand the number of offices, commercial office buildings that we do. We're primarily in institutional real estate. So I have to say that, other than my own experience as a tenant, I don't have firsthand knowledge from my customer base, because we're primarily in pharma and life sciences, higher education, healthcare, government, military, primarily institutional real estate. So this is all secondhand, I have to say.
Your question, Steve, I can't reveal the name of the company at the moment, but a significant law company has already made the decision they're going to be getting their staff to work from home.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. It just occurred to me as we're talking about it, and I'm thinking, my God, law firms that's theater on steroids. It really is.
Right.
They need the technology. They need the technology to work remotely. But 5 years ago, it wasn't really there. Today it is. So.
Well, if you can't go to the building, the theater isn't very interesting.
Right.
But if you can't have clients come to the building, it's just not interesting.
Yeah, right.
But all they will need for that will be meeting rooms or places where they can,
safely meet.
Turn out every now and again, but principally work. They just don't have a desk at that place.
Mm-hmm.
Or the place you like to meet, Roger, is the pub.
The pub, yeah, we could do it in the pub. That seems reasonable, but people are more concerned about when the pubs are open here than when we.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Well, this is going to be the new opportunity for VR, right? So if you want the theater and you want the presence, well, we'll just do it with VR.
Right.
So I'm in the process of bringing on Trevor Duke. There you go. That's perfect timing. So Alper, I think you know Trevor, do you want to introduce him?
Nope.
Or maybe Trevor, you can introduce yourself. Go ahead.
My name is Trevor Duke. I am a commercial property manager based just outside of Detroit. I'm honored to be here with you luminaries of the industry. And, you know, all the headlines are about Google coming back to work and GoDaddy and all these big guys. But that's the, you know, that's the Class A, AAA Manhattan Bay Area stuff. There's a lot of mid-market Class A, Class B real estate that the tenants can still be national creditworthy tenants. They don't make splashy news and they don't have Amazon budgets to do testing. You know, they're emailing us daily. What are you guys doing? What are you doing? And we're trying to get them back in the building. So I did just want to correct Tracy. I do think commercial landlords do have a massive incentive to bring these people back into the buildings. We want to show them that we are using their rent dollars to clean the buildings, to keep the lights on. Please keep paying rent. And that's our entire focus right now. You know, landscaping contracts, capital improvements are being pushed aside.
I thank you. And I think that when I spoke, I wasn't really clear about what I was saying. First of all, I'm a building owner and I have tenants. So you are right. I am completely incentivized to make sure my tenants stay there and keep paying rent. I think that regulation eventually is going to catch up with us, and that's going to be the cover for owning a building, right? You'll have to do certain things that just to keep the building safe and clean. And I mean, that's, if you think about the history of regulation, it's all about safety. And I think that will absolutely happen. So I didn't mean to say that there's no incentive for the owners. I think the decision, the pressure, and what's really going to drive the change is where it's going to,
I guess,
elsewhere in terms of the social aspect of it.
And I didn't think that you were ignoring the case. As Therese pointed out, the larger companies, you know, Google, GoDaddy, they're perfectly fine saying, yeah, you guys, you know, work mobile, whatever. We pay you so much more than our real estate costs that, you know, we're going to focus on that. At the lower levels, I don't think the companies have the flexibility. You know, everybody is working from home right now, but everybody still wants to get back to the office.
I for my own personal benefit, I absolutely hope that you're right.
Yep.
So going back to your comment, Anna, of experimentation, I think this is what we're hearing here, right? People are trying different things, and depending on the asset class and depending on whether you're the, you know, the Googles or the people that Trevor's talking about, you have some scope in terms of what you can try.
Sorry, is that a question?
Yeah, that's kind of that's one of the aspects of the experimentation.
Yeah, I think that, and you know, and we've been kind of focused on offices, but then you got to rethink also, you know, hospitals, universities, government buildings. You know, asset classes change and the requirements are going to change as far as and what they do. But you know, I think earlier when we were talking about whether the facility guy, the building owner is going to have, and you talked to it, Tracy, a little bit, like, do you have an incentive to try and help look for answers, right? You know, maybe they're not the decision makers, but they're the people who the C-suite are going to go to, right? When the C-suite talks about health and safety, they're going to go, okay, well, who do we go talk to? Well, it's our facility building owners, building operators. That's who they're going to go ask. And those guys are going to need answers, right? They're going to need people who are going to come to them and say, try this, let's try that, let's try, you know, what can we do about doing some compliance testing? What are we going to do about, you know, the systems are operating like we say? Are we collecting data? Are we producing at least getting the data, the reports on what's happening, right? We're not even doing basic stuff at this point in time. So, you know, I think from our perspective in our industry, everyone's going to end up focusing back on the guy who operates and owns the building, who's actually operating the building owner himself, because they're the ones who are always looked at to provide the answers for this sort of stuff, regardless of what the questions are. I think the financials are obviously going to drive that, that's what's going to be the driving forces, but the actual, what do we do? What are the things that we try? Going to have to come from the facility guys.
Trevor made an interesting point that I think got overlooked a little bit in terms of the vast majority, quantity-wise, of buildings aren't big commercial buildings with facilities people and sophisticated control systems, right? They're rooftop units and at best VAV boxes with some kind of little central plant. So there's still going to be a gap here in what is done and how it can be handled to bring this back. I think some innovation is going to have to occur to get the masses back into the offices too, is how do we deal with those types of buildings?
But
get a thermostat and an RTU.
That's the IoT guys are going to jump all over this stuff. That's where it's going to come from. The IoTs are going to have all the answers well ahead of the Honeywell, Johnson, Siemens. No offense to those guys. But they're the ones who are doing innovative solutions. They're doing like Alpa's doing with the sensors and the technology, the data collection. I think that's going to be, and I think who was talking earlier too about a lot of stuff that's been driven from smart home technologies are going to be brought forth into the buildings as well. This thing has to move at a bigger, thank you, Therese. This thing is going to move at a bigger pace than any of the traditional controls people are going to be able to deal with.
Yeah, traditionally those big companies stay away from the smaller buildings to a great degree, right? They like the bigger projects. It's more economical for them. So it'll have to come from, some of the people I see on my screen here today in their businesses that are, better able to adjust and deliver solutions for that kind of building footprint.
And they can do small wins, right? You can put in a small solution, get a quick win, and prove a case.
Does anybody know of any surveys about whether people actually want to go back? This is the staff, not the companies or the REITs. Whether people actually want to go back to the offices, or they're saying, "Hey, I don't mind spending a bit of time in the office, but I'm kind of liking this remote working bit as well." I don't know whether there's any surveys or feedback on that, but I mean, obviously a lot of our discussion has been around the owners, our industry and stuff, but it's the staff, whether what their thinking is. Certainly my own son and other people I know are saying, well, I'm happy to work home sometime, but I do need to go back in the office because I want a team meeting and stuff. But so we kind of a mixture.
So Bob Rayner just made basically a comment related to this about if we're becoming successful at home, we as us, and also we're actually being productive to whoever we work for, then that's kind of that's not a good trend for getting people back into the buildings.
Well, Jim Lee's been our poster child for that, right? What would it take to get you back there at this point?
I think in 24 months, I'll be happy to come back after there's been a large reset in the market.
And it's different people too. Like it feels like that's am I really going to say this? My daughter has a book called White Girl Problems. Like this seems like a white collar problem. People at Elon Musk wants, to sue California because he wants to get his line workers back manufacturing stuff. And I don't think they have the kind of choices that you're suggesting. But it is so, and when we talk about the average, I think we start talking about nothing, that really you have to divide segment by segment to think about how things are going to go back. And I put into the chat this, I listened on Saturday to Slate Money, where they interviewed somebody from like Urban Land Institute about the cities. Like some of the things he said, like the biggest transportation problem is vertical. That you imagine lines going around office buildings because people don't want to get on elevators, or only one or two people at a time on an elevator. The people in Manhattan have such a different challenge than the rest of the country. And when you think about it from an Urban Land Institute kind of idea, like the spread out, all the things that we thought we were moving towards density, the millennials love to be downtown. All of a sudden, I think there's going to be a move back we're moving back into cars. People don't want to take public transportation. We're moving back out of the suburbs. Some of the real estate that Trevor's talking about that's farther away is going to become more in demand because people don't want to wait for an elevator in Manhattan. You know, this push to get downtown is going to spread out. People want single family homes again, all this stuff, kind of the sustainability. People wanted density, and now it's I guess I'm starting from the beginning. John Petze's like, we're getting such conflicting signals, but
actually another thing I'd like to point out is that we have an opportunity to leap to the zillennials. We've had the millennial movement, and the zillennials are very well positioned to come into new positions that are being created because they're used to working offline. They know no other way. They were born connected, and so it's become their playground. They're also very poor, and their job markets has completely disappeared, and so they're actually quite willing to come work for these large software companies for very low buck, and they're also offering some incentives to pick out these university folks and bring them in, give them summer jobs, which they didn't really think they would ever get in this environment. And we're sort of seeing a transition there. That's an interesting one I hadn't seen. Was just a giant leap from those old millenniums back to the zillenniums, and they're very suited to doing this type of work, and they know all the tools. You don't have to teach them that. So interesting.
So we're sort of 15 minutes after. I think we need to start to think about wrapping this up. Maybe with a question of, we talked about a lot of stuff here. How do we distill this into what we do, which is building automation, and what should we be thinking and talking about other than watching what's happening and watching the experiments for the next week? How should we be thinking about this?
I will answer with 2 words. Don't watch, let's do it.
Don't what?
Don't watch, let's do it.
Okay.
I'll go back to what I mentioned earlier, which is I think foundationally, we're the cover charge. We have to be there in doing our thing and trying to do as much as possible to make buildings safe for people to get into. Right? It's going to start. Eventually, people are going to start thinking about the buildings. We have to be ready for that.
I think it's the opportunities that exist. I mean, 75% of business was already retrofit and refurbishment. That's just going to step up, and all the buildings are going to have to change. So there's opportunities there if you go and hunt them down, I think.
Yeah, I see the same. I think the opportunities abound. I think the people like this team needs to come up with the ideas and solutions that the property owners, building owners, C-suite are going to be looking for. And I think there's small things, right? Start small. Try not to solve the world's problems. Focus on what we can do, and there's lots of things we can do. We're clever folk. We can come up with good answers. It doesn't have to be everything for all people, but I think we can definitely get it in the right direction.
I think actually we have to just adapt for survival. It's a Darwin kind of a thing, and it's moving forward. That's what it is we've got to adopt adaptation. And also, I think it's really important that we keep sharing what we're thinking. I think one of the good ways of doing that is to just keep posting stuff you find interesting on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever medium you choose, and sharing that with your following, because it gives them a place to learn all this stuff.
Well, I think our self-interest is in making sure people get back into buildings. And so anything we can do to facilitate that, so it would seem to be the right thing. So help, instrumenting these buildings for better sensing around critical environmental conditions, working with contractors who are able to go in and do the retrofits on the HVAC systems to improve the quality of the air, looking at the quality of the water. All those things have a controls component to them. So that's money for our controls contractors, is money for the controls manufacturers, and just being there and being ready to support all of that is where I think we should be. I'd
like to ask a question instead of trying to provide. Oh, possible direction, which is, let's say 2-3 years from now, everyone's vaccinated. How much of what we are talking about here is going to stick? What's going to be left and what's going to be forgotten?
We still have 9/11 turnstiles. You still have bag checks at big high-rise buildings. You still have tighter security. And especially when we're talking about, Tracy, you mentioned the government, there's nothing more more permanent than a temporary government program. So, I hope that it is a very accurate PID loop and we settle back to equilibrium very quickly. But if it takes a while to solve this and we keep getting more and more expensive things put on, and we're paying 4 times as much for janitorial, and we have more complex systems, and we're fogging the building once a week, and treating the water to a higher degree, it's going to become very expensive, and it's going to be hard to be charging more at the same time demand is going down.
I'll go back to Anto's question. I'll phrase it to this industry and this group, of course. I think are we shorting ourselves? I think we've got a lot in things already in our bag of tricks that we can apply tomorrow to help this whole situation. However, I'm not saying it's the full answer, but we've got a good foundational base of technology, solutions, products already there that can help with indoor air quality, as an example, and so you guys identify them, remote monitoring, remote access, and we've got to start somewhere. Start with the foundation, and I think we've got the tools, the technology already in existence. It's up to us to go out in the marketplace, have these conversations with the building owners, the property managers, the facility folks.
And do you think people are going to listen to us during this? Because there's a lot of, to use Jim's word, panic.
I do. I do, because I don't think they have a choice. If they sit and continue to wait, it all comes down to dollar and cents and business. And he who waits hesitates. We all know that. Again, I'm not saying it's the end all be all solution, but we do have the base for a foundational to get started instead of waiting 2 months, 6 months, a year and a half from now.
This, as per Alpa, don't watch, do.
Mm-hmm.
Any other closing comments?
I think the other thing that's asked, or to Jim Butler's comment about, after COVID, it's just going to be the next thing. I mean, what it proved is that we're all tightly connected, a lot tighter than we ever imagined. I was just reading something about there's going to be a container shortage, and like, why do I care whether there's going to be a container shortage? And all of a sudden, I do care. So all of the bits and pieces in our earth and how we kind of pull this all together is become very exposed and very obvious. And who runs our meat plants and all the various ethnic groups and how it's all divided up has now become public knowledge. And I think a lot of that is not going to go back to the way it was. I think I'm seeing a lot of positive stuff that's going to shake out of this.
Well, and with 9/11, not everything that we have today came all at once. It evolved after things happened, right? We didn't have take your shoes off until the shoe bomber, and we didn't have, liquids of a certain size until somebody figured out how to make a liquid bomb and sneak it on. So it kind of evolved a little bit over time. I would suspect we would see that in our industry here too.
And I think, Therese, we might solve the obese problem if we have elevators, people going up and down stairs.
So obesity is solved. We're all going to be vegetarians.
That's right.
And so there's some good stuff. Rick?
As Ken said, a lot of good things are going to come out of this. And I think that's going to be from all of us working together. And I think it can be exciting.
Okay.
It's going to be exciting. I think we can all agree on that.
That's a silver lining.
On that very positive note, I think we should call this a show, call it a wrap, as they say. Thank you all, and thanks to Trevor and to Rick, our guests, and we'll see you all next week. And stay safe, and let's figure out how we can do stuff rather than just watching. Thanks.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Everyone. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.